It's March 14th, 2008, in the SEC basketball tournament, with Alabama trailing Mississippi State 59-56 with only seconds left in the game. Alabama needs some last-second miracle in order to extend the game and their season when this happens.
Riley for three.
Alabama guard Mykal Riley makes a buzzer-beater three to tie the game at 59-59 and send it to overtime. By making this shot, Mykal Riley likely just saved thousands of lives from an oncoming tornado. Let me explain. It's Friday, March 14, 2008, and the SEC basketball tournament is underway in Atlanta, Georgia. Alabama is set to square off against Mississippi State in what should be a good game. This proved to be true as the game approached the last couple of minutes with both teams tied at 56 apiece. With less than a minute to go, Mississippi State retakes the lead 59-56, leaving Alabama in a do-or-die situation. It's now approaching 9:30 p.m. local time, and there's only 7 seconds left in regulation of the game. Alabama then inbounded the ball, and Mississippi State tried to intentionally foul so the game could never get to overtime, but the referees did not call the foul. That play took up 5 of the 7 remaining seconds, meaning that Alabama only had 1 play left in the game to tie it. Alabama had time to inbound the ball to Mykal Riley, who shot to save their season.
Riley for three.
The ball rattles around the rim and then drops in to send the game into overtime in miraculous fashion. It's now a few minutes after 9:30 p.m. local time, and the basketball game is preparing to start the overtime period. Meanwhile, on the west side of the city, a nasty thunderstorm is beginning to enter the area. In a surprising turn of events, severe weather was actually anticipated the next day on Saturday, March 15th, but not for that Friday night. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center for most of that day did not predict any chance of a tornado happening in the Atlanta area. However, when they put out their most recent outlook at roughly 8 p.m. that night, they noticed the isolated storm that was heading towards the metro area and decided to expand the 2% risk into the metro. As the storm enters the city limits, the rotation significantly intensifies and soon thereafter a tornado develops. Meanwhile, back at the Georgia Dome, the teams begin the 5-minute overtime period, completely unaware of the situation that's developing. They play the first minute and a half of the overtime period without issue, and then things begin to get weird. With roughly 3.5 minutes remaining in the overtime, the quality of the TV broadcast noticeably starts to degrade. The storm that was coming in gradually begins to interrupt the TV signal more and more until you can barely make out what's happening in the game. Viewers soon thereafter begin to realize that something very obviously is amiss. With 2 minutes and 11 seconds left in the overtime period, Alabama is fouled, and just seconds later a loud sound begins to envelop the Georgia Dome and the building begins to shake. The players and everybody else in the stadium instantly freeze, trying to figure out what's going on. Just moments later, pandemonium begins to set in at the Georgia Dome as the tornado begins to enter the downtown area. Small debris from the roof then begin to rain down, which influence the players, coaches, and referees to head into the locker rooms to seek shelter. The fans who are in attendance begin to panic, and some of them try exiting the building in fear that the roof may collapse on them. However, officials were quickly notified that the situation outside of the stadium was even worse, and fans were notified to stay where they were. Slowly throughout the next few minutes, the situation began to calm down and the shaking slowly ceased, but the damage was still very evident. Some pieces of debris are still raining down, and there are numerous holes in the side of the building where people could see straight through to the outside and see lightning from the storm. Once the situation calmed down, the next thought on everybody's mind was what's going to be done about the remainder of the game. Meteorologists then advised the people in charge that they in fact had another thunderstorm coming into Atlanta, but they had roughly 1 hour before it arrived. The event organizers then decided to finish the current game since there was only 2.5 minutes left, and then decide what to do about the next game afterwards. After a delay that lasted for more than an hour, the game resumes at roughly 10:50 p.m. Just like the end of regulation, the game comes down to the wire in overtime, with Mississippi State holding a 69-67 lead with just a half a second left. Once again, Alabama has time for just one more shot, which once again falls into the hands of Mykal Riley. However, this time though, the rim is not as kind to him, and his three-point attempt to win the game rattles out and Mississippi State wins. Now that the game between Alabama and Mississippi State has ended, officials could begin to try and decide what to do about the next game that was supposed to begin momentarily. Meteorologists once again confirmed that another storm was still heading towards the city and the structural integrity of the Georgia Dome was still in question. At this point, structural engineers arrived on site to let officials know that the stadium was more damaged than previously thought. They also notified the officials that the stadium was most likely not waterproof anymore, meaning it would not be safe or logical to play the final game of the night. It was then announced over the PA system that the final game of the night would not be played at the current time, and all the spectators had to leave the building immediately.
Tonight's game between the University of Kentucky and the University of Georgia has been postponed.
The fans, staff, coaches, and players soon thereafter step outside into an almost unrecognizable downtown Atlanta. Trees were brought down, cars were thrown, windows were shattered, buildings were destroyed, and there was debris everywhere.
There's 4 cars in a row here, 3 taxis and another car were tossed around by the storm, thrown around, the windows all blown out of them, and just people walking around in just dazed wonderment that this thing blew through without much warning at all.
It was initially thought that there was no fatalities because there was nobody on the streets at the time that the tornado struck. However, this was eventually proven as false, as a few days after the tornado, one body was found in the debris of a destroyed building. That's when the fans and media begin to realize what actually happened here. They realized that if Mykal Riley hadn't made that shot to send the game into overtime, 20,000 people would have potentially been on the street leaving the arena exactly at the moment that the tornado tore through downtown. There's no way of knowing how many fatalities there would have been had this hypothetical situation actually happened, but we do know that it would have been way, way more than the one fatality that did actually happen. Now that the tornado and sporting event were over, the National Weather Service could begin to survey the damage that the tornado caused. The isolated supercell which would spawn the tornado developed in northeast Alabama around 6 p.m. and tracked directly towards Atlanta in the coming hours. The tornado itself first touched down near the intersection of Simpson and Burbank Streets in the Vine City neighborhood just west of downtown Atlanta. The tornado touched down just minutes after 9:30 p.m. and tracked almost due east. As the tornado tracked east, it moved directly over the center of the Georgia World Congress Center about 100 yards north of the Georgia Dome. It then hit the CNN Omni Hotel complex and the Phillips Arena. It then moved across the Equitable Bank Tower and across Interstate 75 and 85. It then moved into the Cotton Mills Loft across from the Oakland Cemetery located near the Fulton-DeKalb County line. After this, the tornado weakened but continued moving into extreme western DeKalb County before finally lifting for good. The tornado had a total path length of 6 miles and a maximum path width of 200 yards. Maximum wind speeds of the tornado were estimated to be 130 miles per hour, which is a high-end EF2. The tornado also caused 30 injuries and 1 fatality. The tornado had a path width of 100 yards as it moved across the Georgia World Congress Center. Also, at this point, the tornado was at EF1 intensity. At least 50 homes were damaged by the tornado, as were several multi-story towers and commercial buildings near and east of Centennial Olympic Park. Windows were blown out of several of these high-rise towers buildings at different levels. Damage in the residential and industrial areas ranged from roofing materials blown from homes and businesses to trees falling on structures and vehicles. The Cotton Mills Loft experienced some of the most significant damage, with the roof blown off and the exterior walls on the top floor blown inward. 2 sections of the 4th floor collapsed all the way into the basement of the building, trapping several people. And most of the injuries related to the tornado happened at this location. It's now the next day, Saturday, March 15th, 2008, and residents are on extra high alert. Their city has just been struck by a high-end EF2 tornado on a day where tornadoes and storms weren't forecasted, and they have now arrived to the day where tornadoes and storms are actually forecasted. The Storm Prediction Center was not holding back about the threat, immediately issuing a moderate risk with a 15% chance of strong tornadoes in the metro area. The situation then grows even more tense when the risk is upgraded at 4 p.m. to a high risk with a 30% chance of strong tornadoes now. Storms initially formed near the Georgia-Alabama border around 2 p.m. and tracked due east towards the metro area. As the clock closed in on 4 p.m. local time, the National Weather Service and locals began watching radar anxiously. An arc of tornadic supercells was entering the area with one of the nastiest looking ones heading straight towards Atlanta. Residents watched on the news as the live cameras from downtown Atlanta looked to have a view of a large tornado on the ground coming straight for the city. The National Weather Service was taking no chances and soon thereafter issued a tornado emergency for downtown Atlanta. However, it turned out later that there was no tornado at all, and what residents were likely seeing on the live cam was a rain shaft or a shelf cloud or something. Atlanta ended up dodging that bullet and did for the rest of that severe weather outbreak as well. Although Atlanta was spared from this event, many others in the area were not as lucky, as the severe weather outbreak ended up producing dozens and dozens of tornadoes across portions of Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Atlanta residents now, though, could finally begin to breathe a sigh of relief and begin picking up the pieces from the tornado that came through on Friday night. Atlanta dodged 2 major bullets in the span of less than 24 hours, and residents will be forever grateful. Locals are also forever grateful for what started off the whole sequence of events. Mykal Riley hitting the game-tying shot to send the game into overtime and likely saving thousands